Good morning, everyone. Dr. Stillman here for another Monday Masterclass. And today we are going to be addressing a question that I received from a premium subscriber in response to my last call for questions from premium subscribers. For those of you wondering what I'm talking about, I am now regularly asking people who subscribe to the premium version of my Substack for their questions so that I can answer them in sessions like this. And the question they asked me is, are omega-6 fatty acids are good? Are they bad? How much of them should I be eating and why? This is a very, very important question to me because it is incredibly powerful, incredibly important in terms of its clinical implications for patients. And this is part of why there's so much, I don't want to say hype or noise, but there's so much attention paid to omega-3s and 6s in the popular consciousness about health and disease. So let's dive in and let's start with this paper where they go over basically a nice quick rundown on what this problem is and a pretty balanced review of basically how I think about it, how they think about it. So several sources of information suggest that human beings evolved on a diet with a ratio of omega-6s to omega-3 essential fatty acids of 1, whereas in Western diets, the ratio is 15 to 1 or 16.7 to 1. Translation: our ancestors ate a lot more omega-3s and far, far fewer omega-6s than we do today. Western diets are deficient in omega-3s and have excessive amounts of omega-6s compared with other diets, and et cetera, et cetera. Excessive amounts of omega-6s and a very high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio promotes the pathogenesis of many diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, and inflammatory and autoimmune diseases, whereas increased levels of omega-3s exert suppressive effects. Translation: more omega-6s relative to omega-3s are driving lots and lots of chronic disease. In the secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease, a ratio of 4 to 1 was associated with a 70% decrease in total mortality. Translation: when you just reduce the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s in the diet from 15 or 16 to 4 to 1, in other words, you cut the omega-6 intake by 4x and you increase the omega-3 intake by some proportion, you reduce total mortality by 70%. Now, that's, I think, one study, but that gives you an idea of how profound this benefit is, right? So people are out there running around and wondering about, well, do I take this drug or this supplement or that supplement or whatever? It's very powerful how this change affects mortality, okay? And that means that it is important to pay attention to the balance of these things in your diet. A ratio of 2.5 to 1 reduced rectal cell proliferation in patients with colorectal cancer, whereas a ratio of 4 to 1 with the same amount of omega-3 had no effect. Translation: dropping this ratio had a significant effect on cell behavior in patients with colorectal cancer, okay? The lower, I'm not actually going to go through the rest of these, but basically they document a lot of benefits, all right? So what does this mean? What's their takeaway, right? A lower ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids is more desirable in reducing the risk of many of the chronic diseases of high prevalence in Western societies. Translation: it's important for us to be mindful of this ratio, and it's the ratio that's important, okay? And this is where people will really get, I would argue, confused because they get this simple reductionistic thinking of omega-6 is bad, omega-3 is good. That's not true. Omega-6s are essential fatty acids. No matter what you do in your diet, no matter what extremes you go to, no matter what you feed your chickens so that their eggs are low in omega-6s, you are still going to contain omega-6 fatty acids. I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. Your body literally needs them to run optimally, okay? The key is that they have to be present in balance. So if you get too much omega-6s coming in, you will drive illness, arguably based on the literature. And if you have inadequate omega-3s to balance them, this will make this worse, right? What has created this situation in our modern society? People are not eating fatty fish. There's an acronym for fatty fish that are also low in mercury that I think is very important for people to think about. That acronym is SMASH, and it stands for sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. Those are the 5 omega-3 rich fish. What's happened to consumption of these fish in modern society? It's plummeted. You will find that when people get into the biohacking wellness space, all of a sudden they're having sardine sandwiches and sardine salad, and they're having herring and mackerel, and everyone's looking at them funny because these fish don't taste as good, arguably, or not as palatable as, say, beef or chicken. The other thing is they're expensive. So you can get dollar ground beef, or you could anyway, once upon a time, at a lot of grocery stores. This drove people to eat tons and tons and tons of beef. Turns out you can't get dollar salmon. It doesn't exist, right? You can't get fish for that little. Fish have become more expensive because of the way we've industrialized modern animal agriculture, which is a disaster for humans, the environment, etc. There's nothing wrong with ethical, sustainable animal agriculture. That is the key to our future on planet Earth as a species. However, the way that it's being done is something of a disaster. Okay? So, Americans traded fish for land meats. This came with a trade-off. They lost omega-3s and they started to eat way more omega-6s. Then seed oils entered the picture, which have huge quantities of omega-6s. And there's only 3 sources of omega-3s in plants that are present in our modern daily diets. And those are chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. If you are not eating those seeds in an abundance, what you will find is that you will, generally speaking, not be getting appreciable quantities of omega-3s in your diet. Okay. This is part of why flax seeds and chia seeds have been a staple in diets throughout the geographic regions where they are found. They are lauded and loved as a food source. Okay. Same thing with fish. Fish historically have been a huge part of the human diet, and that is why we do so much better when we have a high fish diet. Mercury has thrown a large wrench into this machinery, because if you eat lots of high mercury fish that are also high in fish oils, you're arguably not serving yourself well, because as we know from studies like the QPO heart study, the higher your hair mercury level, the higher your risk of death. So we want to avoid mercury in our larger fish, the tuna, the king mackerel, the swordfish, the shark, and so on and so forth. Okay. So is it realistic for us in our modern world to get to a ratio of 1-to-1 omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids? The answer is yes. But what does that look like? Because I see a lot of people talking about, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And you've got to try my low omega-6, high omega-3, cruelty-free, grass-fed, soy-free, gluten-free, dairy-free coffee creamer, because it's going to help you fix your omega-3/6 ratio. Okay. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very, very simple. I'm going to share with you some numbers now from my own personal life and monitoring to give you some idea of what it takes to have a ratio like this without giving up nuts and seeds. And for a moment, I want to talk about nuts and seeds. You're going to see in a moment that nuts and seeds are far and away the top source of omega-6s in the diet. This has created the meme that nuts and seeds are bad, but I don't think that's fair at all. So there's a big difference between organic pecans and corn oil or soybean oil or what should we say? Sunflower seed oil. Okay, sunflower seeds are seeds and they can make an oil, but to say that the sunflower seed oil is the same as the pecan or the sunflower seed itself is not fair. Okay. One of the problems with omega-3 and 6 fatty acids is when you take them out of the food, they have a tendency to go rancid. Why? Because they're highly reactive. And what that means is that anytime you start playing around with oils and fats, you are creating a lot of opportunity for oxidative stress and bad rancid fats and oils getting into the system, which is why I do not buy and do not eat, generally speaking, refined seed oils. And I also don't eat or buy milled, ground, chopped nuts and seeds. I also keep them fresh. So I use them within a couple months of buying them, because that's part of the key, in my opinion, to getting the optimal nutritional density out of it. Before I go on, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, send this to someone who needs to hear it. We would love to serve you in our coaching programs or in my medical practice to help you achieve the well-being that you desire. And if you want to learn more, go to stillmanmd.com, hit patient application, and go to stillmanwellness.com and jump onto our email list. You get free webinars every week, which we put out that are really high yield, really engaging content that you're going to enjoy, and that's going to help you understand this material in more detail. So without further ado, what does it look like for you to eat this diet? So, and to put a finer point on this, why am I so confident that nuts and seeds are part of a healthy diet? Because when you look at the all-cause mortality data, eating more nuts and seeds is healthy. In other words, it reduces your all-cause mortality. And also, this idea of eating nuts and seeds, what does that mean? It's one thing to have a handful of walnuts and then a tablespoon of chia or flax seeds every day, and it's another thing to have, say, sunflower seeds and that are roasted in canola oil. By the way, a lot of seeds are roasted in canola oil. Did you know that? On a daily basis, right? Very different omega-3, 6 ratios, very different nutritional profiles, very different likelihood of contaminants with different chemicals and so on and so forth. Okay. So this really does require a fair amount of detail. So I've just added 4 different foods here to this food log: pecans, salmon, beef, and flax seeds. And I'm trying to show you guys the difference in these foods and the omega-3 and 6 numbers so that you can get a better grasp on what do these things mean and how do they balance one another in your diet. So if we go down to the micronutrient, and I used quantities that are reasonable to use. So it's reasonable for an adult to eat an ounce of a nut or a seed. It's reasonable for them to use or consume an ounce of flax seeds. In fact, I have an ounce of flax seeds blended up in this smoothie right now. And I do this for this reason. You're going to see why in a minute. It's reasonable for an adult to eat a 4-ounce serving of a grass-fed ribeye. Okay. It's reasonable for an adult to eat a 4-ounce serving of sockeye salmon. I would be comfortable eating a 8-ounce portion of salmon or an 8-ounce portion of ribeye. Why would I be comfortable with that? Well, I would be comfortable with that, particularly if I'd exercised heavily. I am a young man, 35 years old. I have a very high metabolic rate because of my age and my gender, right? So this isn't going to look the same for all people. And that's why getting details on the numbers is actually very important. So what are the omega-3, 6 balance? What does it look like in here? Okay. So you'll see that because there's flax seeds and salmon in the diet, you get to this level of omega-3, 6 balance. Okay. That's really important. Why is that important? Because when people say the omega-3, 6 balance in the diet, it's critical to focus on the omega-3 content and composition. Look at the salmon. There's 1.2 grams per 4-ounce serving. Do the math. Look at how little as a proportion of the total omega-3s the sockeye salmon is. And remember, that's in 4 ounces. So 4 ounces of sockeye salmon equals 1.2 grams of omega-3s. Look at the flax seeds. 1 ounce, 28 grams equals 6.5 grams of omega-3s. It is extremely challenging to get to a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s without flax seeds, chia seeds, and walnuts. Okay? Now, can you make up the difference with things like fish oil? Sure, but do you need to? One of the discrepancies in the data that we see over and over again is there's many studies that do not show a reduction in all-cause mortality with fish oil supplementation. In other words, raising your omega-3 levels using foods is not the same as taking an omega-3 based supplement. I don't care if it comes from algae or fish or flax seeds or chia seeds. This is simply a matter of fact, which is why I always lead with food. And we're going to explain, or I'm going to explain, why I think there's this discrepancy in the literature. So can you get to a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3s to 6s with fish alone? Yes. You have to eat a significant quantity of it, and you will have to restrict omega-6s in a fairly significant way. Why? Let's look at pecans. So pecans have 0.3 grams of omega-3s. Now let's look at omega-6s. Pecans have 5.8 grams. In this day, the omega-6 is overwhelmingly coming from pecans, right? It's not, people will say things like red meat is high in omega-6s. That's sort of true in the sense that if you look at the amount of omega-6s in this grass-fed Australian beef ribeye, it's 0.4 grams in a 4-ounce quantity. Look at the omega-3s. It's 0.1. So there's a 4-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. in Australia, based on this database, in Australian grass-fed beef ribeye. I will make a note here that these numbers are not to be taken as gospel. They can vary substantially. So I'm just speaking in very broad strokes, and I'm speaking in generalities because, where things come from, how they're raised, what they're fed really does matter. And it can't be taken for granted. So back to the pecans. If you're going to eat nuts and seeds that are rich in omega-6s, which most of them are, you must be mindful of balancing that with chia, flax seeds, and walnuts in order to normalize that ratio. If you do not eat nuts and seeds, you are going to have, generally speaking, a low omega-6 diet. That may or may not be good for you because, as I mentioned, when you look at the data, nuts and seeds reduce your risk of death. And I don't think that people who are scared of omega-6s and for that reason are avoiding nuts and seeds understand these distinctions, which is why I'm sharing them with you. If you eat flax seeds, if you eat chia seeds, if you eat walnuts in an appropriate proportion and you add to it cold water fish, that is a recipe for optimal omega-3/6 ratios. I'm open to the idea that the optimal ratio of omega-3s to 6s is 1-to-1 or maybe 2-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. Personally, I think that data is being drawn from a lot of different models, and I wonder if those assumptions underlying those models are correct. I haven't had the time to dig into it in great detail. I'm just telling you that I would eat this way, and I'm eating this way to protect myself from the hazards of having too high of an omega-6 ratio. I'm currently running an experiment that I will share with you guys the results of here shortly, where I ate more fish and I consciously consumed more chia and flax seeds. And we're going to see how much my dietary interventions alone increased my omega-3s and reduced my omega-6 levels in my blood. And that's something I'm going to retest probably next month. So why do I think there's this discrepancy in the literature, right? I already mentioned that when you drop your omega-6 intake, right, based on what the study we started with, you see this reduction in people's symptoms, you see this reduction in mortality, you see all these benefits, right? However, this doesn't mean that you are just fixing this problem by adding more omega-3s. What happens when you eat a diet rich in omega-3s? Let's look. That means you eat more chia seeds, flax seeds, potentially walnuts, and cold water fish. How do these foods stack up against other foods with regards to other vitamins and minerals? Well, let's look. Fish packs an enormous punch for vitamin D. If you tell me that you want to maintain a normal vitamin D, or I shouldn't say normal, optimal vitamin D level in a cold, dark place, England, Russia, Canada, Minnesota, Washington State, and you are not going to eat fish and you're just going to try and get sun during the summer, then you had better be outside 8 hours a day the whole summer to even have a snowball's chance at keeping an optimal vitamin D through the winter. In fact, if you look at the diets of people in cold, dark places, overwhelmingly, they rely upon fish as a food source year round, and particularly in the winter. I know this in part because I worked in Bemidji, Minnesota and Deer River, Minnesota, where it is, the pastime in the winter is ice fishing. You drill down through inches and inches or feet and feet of ice. And they have these giant trailers that they haul onto the ice. And the ice is so thick that it can hold these huge trucks and trailers where people fish out of. So this is what the natives would do. They would they would bore through the ice in the winter in order to go ice fishing. And they would be eating these very high vitamin D rich fish that were also very fatty and very rich in omega-3s. You'll see that as you get further and further away from the equator, you get more and more omega-3s in the diet, specifically from seafood, by the way. And if you're going to be in more and more warm tropical locations, and that gets into a whole other conversation about, should people, how do you get omega-3s in different areas and environments eating a local diet? Because if you're going to try and get significant amounts of omega-3s from warm water fish in, say, Florida or the Caribbean, you are going to wind up with a lot of mercury because there are almost no high omega-3 rich fish in these latitudes because the fish don't need the omega-3s because the water's not cold enough. Okay. They also have much lower concentrations, as I understand it, of vitamin D, but I digress. So as your fish intake goes up, your omega-3 intake goes up, and so does your vitamin D intake, doesn't it? Right? We might look at some of these other metrics, right? So salmon, also very rich in B12. Salmon, also very rich in vitamin B6. Salmon, also very rich in B5. Salmon, also very rich in niacin. Salmon, also very rich in riboflavin and somewhat in thiamine. So there's tons of vitamins in salmon. And I don't think that's a coincidence that then fish consumption goes along with a lower risk of death and an overall better quality of life and quantity of life. And by extension, part of the effect of this is having a higher omega-3 level and ratio to omega-6s. What else do you see? You will see that salmon are an excellent source of selenium. You will see that they are an excellent source of potassium. You will see that they are an excellent source of, believe it or not, even magnesium they're actually pretty good for. And then what was the other one? Copper, they're okay. Calcium, not so much. What I do want to pay attention to here is the flax seeds. So flax seeds, calcium, a significant amount of calcium is in flax seeds per weight. And this is where people will miss this. So remember, we're talking about 1 ounce of flax seeds that fits in the palm of your hand. And you're getting 72 or 73, whatever, milligrams of calcium. That's a substantial dose per gram quantity, okay? And people don't realize this because they don't think of food in terms of milligrams of a nutrient per gram of weight that they're consuming. In other words, you can get a lot more minerals from foods than you can get a lot more minerals per pound from things like nuts and seeds than you can from many other foods. The same can be true of animal products, by the way. And to be fair, almost every food, that's to some degree the case, but it varies. One nutrient I want to pay attention to is manganese. Why? Because one of the reasons I believe that nuts and seeds help or reduce all-cause mortality is that manganese is present in an abundance in nuts and seeds. And when people don't eat nuts and seeds, you'll see that their manganese intake is much, much lower by many milligrams sometimes than if they did eat nuts and seeds. And I'm convinced this is a therapeutic effect. And I could go on about that, and I'll probably make some more content about that at some point. Zinc, also, you get a fair amount of nutrients from nuts and seeds, by the way. So in closing, this is another great paper where I think they summed this up very, very well. The ratio of omega-6, 3 fatty acids in the brain is between 1:1 and 2:1, which is in agreement with the data from evolutionary aspects of diet, genetics, and the studies with the FAT1 animal model. Translation, it makes sense based on brain composition of fatty acids that 1:1 or 2:1 is what we're shooting for in the diet. Therefore, as a ratio of 1:1 or 2:1 omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids should be the target ratio for health. Because chronic diseases are multigenic and multifactorial, it is quite possible that the therapeutic dose of the omega-3 fatty acids will depend on the degree of severity of diseases resulting from the genetic predisposition and the endogenous metabolism of linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic acid. I take exception to this, and the translation of this is basically we should all be eating this ratio of omega-3s to omega-6 fatty acids. But what's lost here in this is what I see being lost in the vast majority of popular ideas about what people should eat and how to pay attention to omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids, which is essentially that the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid component of this is what matters. I beg to differ. It is not the same thing to take fish oil as it is to eat a diet that is rich in omega-3s and low in omega-6s. It is simply not the same thing. I am not currently taking a fish oil supplement. I'm currently eating a diet that is high or rich in omega-3s, and it's also technically rich in omega-6s, but I'm shooting for a 1:1 or 1:2 ratio. And I'm honest with patients that most of them, if they get to a 1:4 ratio, are going to be doing way better than most people, and arguably will see a significant improvement in their health just from that. And the discrepancy between the outcomes that I believe we see and that are borne out in the literature between the people who just supplement with their omega-3s and who eat an omega-3 rich diet have to do with these complex issues that I've unpacked here, which is that if you eat an omega-3 rich diet, you're going to be eating a significant proportion of plant omega-3s. those are going to contain a high density of minerals. And those minerals, as well as vitamins, are critical to good health, optimal vitality, longevity, etc. The same is true of fish, which are also packed with minerals and also packed with vitamins. So don't miss that, because you cannot out-supplement a bad diet. Every person I know who knows anything about good outcomes and great results in integrative medicine agrees with that very simple, very fundamental premise of what we do, which is if you're eating a poor diet and an unhealthy diet, you are not going to get great results no matter how many supplements you take. And for many people, the answer is not to take a fish oil supplement. It's to clean up their diet and clean up the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s by integrating things like flax seeds and chia seeds or walnuts plus fatty salmon, using that acronym SMASH to figure out which species to eat, and then moderating intake of omega-6s from processed food, which is where you get this massively lopsided ratio in the omega-3/6 numbers. You really can't get to the ratios of omega-3s and 6s that they're talking about in modern society of like 15 or 16 to 1. It's hard to get there if you don't eat processed food and you don't also at the same time, practically speaking, religiously avoid fish, chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. And that's why it was very easy for me to throw together 4 foods where you're going to see a 1-to-1 ratio essentially of omega-6s to omega-3s, so long as you're getting that balance in there. Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Make sure you're on the email list at stillmanwellness.com to get access to our webinars. We've got a light therapy webinar series coming up here that's starting today at 4 p.m. It's going to be myself and Kathleen Horstmeyer, who is a member of the Quantum Biology Collective. That's going to run for several weeks. We are also doing we have a lot of new stuff coming out. So make sure you're on the list at stillmanwellness.com to get announcements about that. You're going to really enjoy, I think, some of the initiatives that we're launching here to help you guys understand this material and understand how to get and remain as healthy as possible. And this, by the way, is also my Monday Masterclass from my Substack, stillmanmd.substack.com. Go subscribe there if you care more about the geeky, in-depth, nitty-gritty stuff and type of content, which is distinct from the stillmanwellness.com newsletter. And if you'd like to become a patient at my practice, go to stillmanmd.com and hit apply for consultation. We are taking new patients, and you can learn more by going there and hitting the apply for consultation tab. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care and have a great day.